Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. China is firing ballistic missiles over Taiwan. The Chinese military is a stone's throw away from Taiwan. Flights are being cancelled, ships are being rerouted, warnings are being exchanged. This is escalation and there's no telling how far it will go. First, the Chinese state media started talking about the reunification of Taiwan. Now, Chinese diplomats have joined the chorus. If this turns into a war, it will be a very costly war. The world is already suffering the consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The stakes will be much higher if China clashes with Taiwan. We've been talking about America's commitment. Now there's a question mark on how US allies will respond. Are they united in their stand on Taiwan? Experts say Europe sees this as America's problem, which is typical of Europe. We'll talk about that. Also the impact on India. How will the escalation in the Taiwan Strait impact China's border standoff with India? There's a lot to discuss. We'll start with what's happening in Taiwan. That's what the day looked like for Taiwan. Chinese forces have encircled the island. Bullets and rockets are flying in every direction. Chinese social media was flooded with videos today. Just look at this one. These videos were floating on the Chinese internet. We've not been able to verify them, but here's what we can say. China is now firing ballistic missiles towards Taiwan. The PLA launched at least 11 missiles today. It is conducting drills dangerously close to Taiwan, in some cases barely 19 kilometers away from Taiwan. That's how close the Chinese military has come. Let me repeat that. China's army has come within 19 kilometers of Taiwan. The message is quite clear. They won't stop here. Xi Jinping looks determined to escalate this. The question is, how far will he go? And this is our cover story tonight. We'll start with the drills, or what China is calling targeted military operations. They began the moment Nancy Pelosi landed in Taiwan. She's the highest-ranking U.S. politician to visit the island in 25 years. Pelosi is the third in line to the U.S. presidency, and that's what makes her so important. She left Taipei yesterday. She spent barely 18 hours in Taiwan. But Beijing is still fuming. China sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, as an integral part of their country, and it is willing to take Taiwan by force, if necessary. China says Pelosi's visit violated its sovereignty, and in response, it is conducting these drills. The problem is, China has taken its military response a step too far. Look at this map. This is Taiwan with 6 danger zones around it. Chinese military is hitting these areas with all kinds of drill, live ammunition drills, precision missile strikes, a joint blockade, a sea target assault, strikes on ground targets, and demonstrating airspace control. Basically, the Chinese military is showing off all its capabilities, everything it can do to make Taiwan sweat. And it's not just the drills that Taipei is worried about. The relentless cyber attacks on the Taiwanese government continue. Today, the website of Taiwan's defense ministry was targeted. It suffered a cyber attack and went offline for a while. Before this, the website of Taiwan's presidential office came under a similar attack. Is China behind these? Well, there's no proof, but there is precedent. China has carried out cyber attacks on Taiwan in the past, and this is Taipei's response.
Our government is even more resolute to safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our nation. In light of the current scenario, our government will not only actively strengthen its self-defense capabilities, but will also maintain close ties with like-minded countries like the United States. Together, we will defend the rules-based international order, avoiding further regional escalation while vigorously protecting the security of the Taiwan Strait and the freedom, openness, peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific region.
The stability of the Indo-Pacific is under threat. China's military operations are disrupting everything. Flights are being cancelled. South Korea's flagship carrier, Korean Air, has cancelled all flights between Seoul and Taipei. Another airline, Asiana, has also cancelled flights from Taiwan. Ships are being rerouted, and we have some numbers. 3 tankers carrying LNG, or liquefied natural gas, have had to change course. Before the drills began, there were some 45 ships in the region. Now, there are believed to be just 15. And all of them are steering clear of the danger zones, the areas where the PLA is most active. And do remember, the Taiwan Strait is one of the world's most important trade routes. China has shut it down completely. Beijing says its actions are justified.
Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. The exercise and training activities carried out by the Chinese army near Taiwan Island are necessary and legitimate. These are the measures to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity, to counter the separatist forces of Taiwan's independence and external interference. The relevant Chinese departments have issued safety warnings and navigational warnings in advance, and China's practice is in line with international law and international practice.
China won't stop at these drills. Nancy Pelosi's visit has given it an opportunity, a pretext to pursue its reunification plan. China's top diplomat in France has spoken out. His name is Lu Shai. He's China's ambassador to France. He spoke to a French news station and gave insights into Beijing's plans for Taiwan. Let me quote from what he said, and this is very important. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the majority of the population of Taiwan was for reunification. But why now are they against it? It is because the Democratic Progressive Party has spread a lot of anti-Chinese propaganda. After the reunification, he says, we will do re-education. Re-education after reunification, that is Beijing's plan for Taiwan. It wants to turn this island into another Xinjiang. The world clearly has a lot to worry about. And how is the world reacting to Nancy Pelosi's visit, to the Chinese military action, and to pretty much everything else that we just spoke about? What is the world's take on the Taiwan showdown? As always, the world is divided. Some countries support China, others back Taiwan and Pelosi, and still others are firmly on the fence. The most interesting case is that of Europe. Their silence is telling. It raises questions on whether the West is united on Taiwan. If America joins a conflict in Taiwan, will Europe back it? We'll discuss that. Let's first tell you about the countries that are backing China. The usual suspects: Pakistan, North Korea, Russia, Iran, Belarus, Cuba, Myanmar, surprisingly Thailand, and Sri Lanka. Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe posted this. He says he met with the Chinese ambassador and reiterated Sri Lanka's support for the One China policy. Now, what's the One China policy? It is based on the principle that there is just one China and Taiwan is a part of that China. All of the other countries that I just mentioned, from Pakistan to Cuba to Russia, have issued similar statements, all of them supporting the One China policy. Cuba, in fact, has gone a step further. It says it condemns the interference in China's quote-unquote internal affairs. I wonder what the people of Taiwan will have to say to this. And this is Pakistan's word of support for China. It says, and I'm quoting, Pakistan strongly reaffirms its strong commitment to the One China policy and firmly supports China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Lots of adjectives. And frankly, anything less from Pakistan would have been news. This is not. This is what Pakistan is saying. What about Russia? Russia says China has the right to hold military drills around Taiwan. Well, who gave China that right? Nancy Pelosi's quote-unquote unnecessary provocation, says Russia. Listen to this.
Вы знаете, что напряженность в регионе была и вокруг Тайваня, собственно.
As you know, the tensions in the region around Taiwan were caused artificially. We all understand what caused those tensions: Nancy Pelosi's visit. It was an absolutely unnecessary visit and an unnecessary provocation. As for the drills, it's China's sovereign right to hold them.
Вот. А что касается маневров, то это суверенное право Китая.
And just like there's support for China, there's also an outpour of criticism. Liz Truss, Britain's prime ministerial hopeful and current foreign secretary, is among the most vocal critics. She says, I do not support China's inflammatory language on the issue. The G7 too has called out Chinese aggression. In a statement, G7 foreign ministers said, and I quote, there is no justification to use a visit as pretext for aggressive military activity in the Taiwan Strait. Europe's Foreign Affairs representative, Josep Borrell, has asked China to not read too much into Nancy Pelosi's visit. This is what he said. It is normal and routine for legislators from our countries to travel internationally. Closer home, Japan has expressed concerns over the PLA's military drills. Tokyo says that a number of Chinese missiles landed within Japan's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Exclusive Economic Zone. Japan has lodged a protest with China. They've called it a matter of their national security. But what about Europe? What do individual European nations have to say? Not very much at the moment. Remember, not too long ago, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar had said that Europe must grow out of the mindset that the world's problem is not Europe's problem. And Europe's reaction to the present crisis fits perfectly into that template. European countries have chosen to stay out of this. Europe, being Europe, has put its trade above Taiwan, it seems. China is the EU's largest import partner and the third largest export partner. So it seems Europe does not want to risk trade for what it believes is America's fight. Europe is also very aware of its own ongoing war. And can you blame them? Plus, Europe swears by the One China policy. It neither recognizes Taiwan nor is its strategy on Taiwan ambiguous, as is the case with the US. And this explains Borrell's almost consolatory statement. Most European nations are quiet, Lithuania being the exception. Lithuania's foreign minister says Pelosi has opened the door to Taiwan much wider. I'm sure other defenders of freedom and democracy will be walking through soon. Again, this is on expected lines given Lithuania's recent tussle with China. Remember, Lithuania had let Taipei open a quasi-embassy in Vilnius. It had also sent ministers to Taipei. China retaliated by slapping sanctions, and all of this happened very recently. So when it comes to Taiwan, Europe looks divided, just like the rest of the world. So that's how the world is responding. What about India? How should India view China's aggressive moves? What would happen if China invades Taiwan? How will it impact the border standoff with India? We crunched some numbers, and the findings are interesting. First, let's look at what China would need to conduct an invasion. There are various estimates of what China will need in terms of manpower and resources, but most experts agree that the PLA would need at least 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers. 300,000 to 400,000. With this strength, the Chinese military can put boots on the ground on both fronts. The PLA, at the moment, has over 2 million active personnel. The Chinese army alone has over 900,000 soldiers. Reports say China maintains 60,000 soldiers along the border with India. And in an actual war, it needs much more than numbers to win a war. Having said that, if these numbers hold, just theoretically, China can still manage two conflicts simultaneously. What does this mean for New Delhi? It means that there's no easing of the border standoff, at least immediately. In fact, the Taiwan drill should serve as a reminder that China won't hesitate to start a war and that it only understands the language of strength. So just like Taiwan, India needs to be prepared for a Chinese escalation, and India is doing exactly that. It is reaching out to allies. In the next few months, Indian forces will participate in several key exercises. Reports say Indian and American troops will conduct a joint exercise. This will happen in the month of October. For 2 weeks, troops from both sides will train in high altitudes. The exercise is called Upadhyay, or war drills. India is hosting the drills in the state of Uttarakhand, the hill state of Uttarakhand. The soldiers will train at an altitude of 10,000 feet. And this has been a while in the making. In the month of June, remember, General Charles Flynn visited New Delhi. He is the commanding general of the US Army in the Pacific. And he expressed concerns about the Chinese build-up near the Indian border. He called it, quote-unquote, eye-opening and alarming. General Flynn pushed for deeper defense ties between India and the US. In fact, I have a statement with me. This is what he said. I think some of the infrastructure that is being created in the Western Theatre Command is alarming. He's talking about China. And so much, like across all of their military arsenal, one has to ask the question, why? I think it is worthy of us working together as a counterweight to some of those corrosive and corrupted behaviors that the Chinese demonstrate. At the end of the day, this sharing of soldier, tactical and operational practices increases everybody's readiness to respond to whatever crisis may occur. So that's the thought behind the drills. The timing is interesting, though. October, remember, is also the month when the Communist Party Congress will be held. It happens every 5 years, and this edition is very important. It will be an important event because this time Xi Jinping will seek a record third term as the president of China. He hopes to create history at this party conference in October. A third term will make him invincible in the Communist Party. Xi will become China's president for life. As of today, only one leader holds that distinction, and that's Mao Zedong, the founder of modern-day China. So Xi Jinping's stature will be elevated in October. At a time like this, military drills by regional powers could overshadow his big party. And this is not the only exercise that has been planned. There are multiple exercises planned. Apart from the India-US drill, there's something called the Super Garuda Shield. The US is hosting this drill along with Indonesia. This will be in Indonesia, Sumatra Island, and this is an annual affair. But this year, the scope of this exercise has been expanded dramatically. Several countries have joined as observers. The list includes Canada, France, India, Malaysia, New Zealand, South Korea, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Australia, Japan, Singapore, and the United Kingdom. So a total of 14 countries are involved. More than 5,000 soldiers are participating. What is the objective? Again, to enhance what they call interoperability, to promote cooperation in a free and open Indo-Pacific. These are the objectives. China's military actions against Taiwan have raised the stakes. They raise a new security challenge in the region. And there's only one way to counter China at this point: regional cooperation. But what if those efforts do not work? What would an actual Chinese invasion look like? We do have a reference point to look at, and that is Ukraine. The whole world is feeling the effect of Russia's war. Our fuel is more expensive, our food prices are rising, our energy bills are too high, but a war in Taiwan would be even worse. Think of it like this. If the Ukraine war is a sword fight, a Taiwan war will be a shootout, and I'll tell you why. First, because of the parties involved. Both Russia and Ukraine are financially weak. Their combined GDP is around $1.7 trillion. Compare that to Taiwan and China. China alone has a GDP of $12 trillion. Taiwan's GDP is around $650 billion. So the shock to the global economy is going to be huge. Also, there is the possibility of outside intervention. I'm talking about the United States. If Joe Biden does intervene, all bets are off. Two of the biggest economies in the world would be in direct war. 3. If Japan decides to get involved, there'll be 3. In such a scenario, world trade would completely collapse. Let me show you some numbers. China makes up 12.4% of world trade. That's both imports and exports put together. The US makes up 8.1%. What about Taiwan? It makes up 1.7% of all global exports. In simple words, they're more integrated into the world economy, which was not the case with Ukraine and Russia. Both countries sell gas and grains. Important, yes, but not enough to derail global trade as we know it. And the idea behind this report is not to be alarmist. This is a dispassionate assessment of what the near future may look like. Another reason why this war would hurt more is the location of the conflict. Ukraine is tucked away near the Black Sea. Taiwan is centrally located in the Indo-Pacific. It straddles one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. Almost 33% of seaborne trade goes through this region. If it becomes a battleground, the impact would be immeasurable. And I mean it, literally. It's impossible to predict what kind of hit our world economy would take. The biggest casualty would be electronics, it's safe to say. Taiwan is the biggest manufacturer of semiconductors. They make up around half of all exports. If China attacks, that trade would ground to a halt. Either the PLA army will destroy the factories or they'll take control of them. Either way, there is going to be chip shortage. And we experienced a similar situation during the pandemic. Taiwan's chip exports slowed down in 2020. Do you remember the consequence? Mobile phones became more expensive. Vehicles were unavailable. There were long waiting periods. Computers could not be manufactured. Basically, the technology industry came to a standstill. A war would be even worse because China is also a technology powerhouse. Their biggest exports are computers, phones, machine parts. If the PLA goes to war, industries will shift focus. They won't be exporting smartphones then. They will recalibrate to bolster the army, to build radars, engines, ammunition. And don't forget the sanctions. Both the US and China will likely wage an economic war. How would that play out? The Americans will probably try to squeeze China's energy imports, basically ground the PLA war machine. The Chinese will probably seize US assets in China, perhaps use cyber attacks to disable American networks. And this back and forth would ruin both economies. In fact, the RAND Corporation has published a study on how this economic war would play out. They say America's GDP will fall by 5 to 10%, China's by 25 to 35%. For the world, it would be a global economic emergency, or simply put, a recession. So that is the economic cost of a Taiwan invasion. What about the political cost? Will a victorious China stop at Taiwan? Chances are they won't, which means countries in the Indo-Pacific must prepare for war. In other words, an arms race. Japan, for instance, will have to immediately suspend pacificism. They will have no option but to arm themselves. A former Pentagon official is already suggesting this. His name is Elbridge Colby. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Donald Trump. He says Japan must triple its defense spending immediately. Right now, they spend just 1% of their GDP on defense. If Taiwan falls, that may have to be increased by 2 to 3%. Rather, increased to 2 to 3%. Same with the ASEAN states. They will have two options against a belligerent China: either succumb to Beijing's pressure or arm themselves for deterrence. And what I just described is a hypothetical situation. Actually, scratch that. It's a hypothetical nightmare. A world crippled by shortages and recession, an Indo-Pacific armed to the teeth, and the world's biggest economies locked in war. It may not be a global war, but it will be a global economic crisis, make no mistake. So both Joe Biden and Xi Jinping must exercise restraint. The cost of a war in the Taiwan Strait is simply too high. It would set the world back by years, if not decades. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi continues her maverick mission to Asia. The US House Speaker is not stopping at Taiwan and China. She's sending a message to Pyongyang too. Nancy Pelosi was in South Korea today. She paid a visit to the demilitarized zone, the de facto border between the North and the South. And she has vowed support to denuclearize North Korea. But South Korea's president is distancing himself from Pelosi. Yoon Suk-yeol, the president, was in Seoul when Pelosi visited, but he did not meet her. His office said the president is on a holiday. Why is South Korea's president avoiding the US House Speaker? Our next report has the answers.
Nancy Pelosi is on a mission. After a controversial trip in Taiwan, she reached South Korea. The US House Speaker kicked up a storm in Seoul, too. Pelosi visited the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. This is a heavily fortified border. It divides the Korean peninsula in half. It is 250 kilometers long and about 4 kilometers wide. In 1953, the two Koreas signed an armistice agreement. It ended the hostilities of the Korean War. The DMZ was a product of that pact. Effectively, this is a buffer zone. But it is one of the most tense and dangerous borders in the world. Over the years, hundreds of lives have been lost here. Several of these victims were North Korean defectors, but this border has also witnessed attempts to make peace. The last one in 2019. The then US President Donald Trump had met Kim Jong-un. America wanted North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons program, but the talks ultimately collapsed. Pelosi is the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit the DMZ after Trump. But she was not on a peace mission. The intention of her visit was to send a message to Pyongyang.
When we come and travel as a delegation, our three main pillars are security, economics, and governance. In all three of those areas, the U.S.-South Korea, U.S.-Korea relationship is very strong, and we learn from each other.
The two sides express concern over the grave situation in which North Korea's level of threat is heightening, and based on a powerful and extended deterrence against North Korea that our public can recognize, we agree to support the two governments' efforts for denuclearization.
But Pelosi's outreach was met with a major snub. South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol didn't meet Pelosi. The president didn't even send a delegation to greet her. Why is Yoon avoiding Pelosi? Seoul said the president is on a vacation this week. However, he did give Pelosi a phone call.
They talked for a long time about diplomacy, defense, technology cooperation, youth, women, and climate change issues. Pelosi's delegation is scheduled to visit the Panmunjom JSA area. President Yoon said that this visit will become a sign of a strong deterrence from South Korea and the United States against North Korea.
Yoon is now being accused of trying to placate China. He rose to power by promising a more hawkish stance against Beijing. But since taking power, Yoon has been under pressure. China and South Korea have been locked in a diplomatic battle over trade. China has been South Korea's top trading partner. But Yoon wants his country to get closer to the U.S. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan led to a furious response from China. Looks like South Korea is trying to avoid Beijing's wrath.
Asia is hogging the spotlight right now, but don't forget, there is an actual war happening in Europe, and neither side is making any effort to end it. On Wednesday, the United States moved one step closer to another provocation. The US Senate voted to give Sweden and Finland NATO membership. The results were a foregone conclusion. 95 senators voted in favor. Only one senator, Josh Hawley, voted against it. His excuse is interesting. Hawley says America must choose between Europe and Asia, that the US can either take on Russia or China, not both. Well, he has a point, but he has no support. Senator Hawley was alone. Both Republicans and Democrats voted overwhelmingly to expand NATO.
Russia's unprovoked aggression in Ukraine has changed how we think about the world's security. That's why I strongly support the decision of these two great democracies, Sweden and Finland, to join the most important and defensive alliance in the world, NATO.
Funny how America is suddenly bipartisan. They're divided on abortion, they're divided on guns, but when it comes to provoking Russia, everyone is on board. Well, that's US politics for you. This ratification bill will now head to Joe Biden's desk, and once he signs it, the process will be complete. Now, all 30 NATO members must do the same. Their parliaments must approve the inclusion of Finland and Sweden. How many have done so far? More than half the members have completed the process. This includes Germany, Italy, Canada, and France. But the big worry is Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan did agree in principle to expanding NATO, but he's keeping the alliance guessing. If Turkey votes against the move, NATO cannot expand. Basically, Erdogan could still play spoilsport, and he's not alone. Let me introduce you to Gerhard Schröder. He was the Chancellor of Germany from 1998 to 2005. His tenure coincided with Putin's rise in Russia. The two men share an excellent relationship. You could say they're friends. Last week, Schroeder traveled to Moscow to meet Putin. After returning, he gave an interview to a German newspaper. I'll give you the important takeaways. Number one, Schroeder says he won't apologize for his friendship with Putin. 2, he says the Kremlin wants a negotiated settlement. 3, he says Ukraine has no choice of regaining Crimea. No chance, rather, of regaining Crimea. 4, he accused Ukraine of violating the Minsk agreement. And 5, he suggested Austria-style neutrality for Ukraine. You can imagine how President Volodymyr Zelensky reacted to this. He called Schroeder's actions disgusting. Listen to this.
And in general, it is simply disgusting when former leaders of major states with European values work for Russia, which is at war against these values. Russia activates different emissaries, with these saying the terrorist state allegedly wants negotiations. If Russia indeed wanted to end the war, it would not be pushing its reserves to the south of Ukraine right now.
Zelensky has every right to be angry. Having said that, Schroeder's overall sentiment is not really wrong. Talks are the only way to settle this war. Ukraine will have to accept neutrality eventually. So why is everyone lashing out at Schroeder? Because his intentions are questionable. Like I said, Schroeder is very close to Vladimir Putin, perhaps a bit too close. After leaving office, Schroeder has worked with 3 Russian firms, Nord Stream AG, Rosneft and Gazprom. He personally benefits from Russian gas companies. His own party is investigating him at the moment. There's a good chance he will be expelled for ties with Putin. So naturally, Zelensky lashed out at him. It was the right message from the wrong messenger. It also reveals a deeper divide in the European Union. How long will Europeans keep paying the price for Russia's war? At what point do they rebel? And if such a rebellion does happen, it will be over energy. Across the EU, governments are rationing power. In France, air-conditioned shops must keep their doors closed. If not, they could be fined €750. Outdoor cafes have been banned from using heaters or ACs. In Germany, lights are being turned off at fountains and tourist sites. Government buildings have turned off water heating. In Greece, ACs have been limited to 27 degrees Celsius during the summer. Public buildings are being fitted with window shields to keep the heat out. Spain has announced a similar move. In summer, ACs cannot run below 27 degrees in Spain. In winter, they cannot go beyond 19 degrees. The Prime Minister and his cabinet have started ditching ties to stay cool. It tells you how dire the situation is. And come winter, things will only get worse. European countries are trying to fill their storage tanks before temperatures drop. And the key to that is the Nord Stream pipeline. Russia is shipping gas via this pipeline, but the flow has reduced just 20% of the full capacity. To increase this, Russia needs a turbine, the same turbine that was stuck in Canada for repairs. We told you about it. It has since been returned to a German factory, but Russia is refusing to take it. Moscow says the papers are not in order. So guess what Chancellor Olaf Scholz did? He inspected this turbine himself on Tuesday. Take a look at this.
Reasons why this delivery cannot take place. And to demonstrate that, to understand that, to show that, is one reason why I am very grateful that I was able to look at this with my own eyes today. And also to be able to show to everybody else that there is nothing mystical going on here.
It's a question of nerve and patience. Russia is resolved to fight till the end. Ukraine has decided to defend till the last man. The difference is Ukraine needs Western weapons to fight. They need European support to stay in the war, which is why Putin's energy war is so crucial to this conflict. If the European public put electricity over Ukraine, it could be game over. And the problem is, Europe is not sinking alone. It is adamant on taking the whole world with it. Developing countries were hoping for some stability in 2022. They had 2 years of lockdown. So this year was supposed to be the year of recovery. Well, not anymore. The Ukraine war has emerged as a double whammy. We saw Sri Lanka fall over the edge. The question is, who is next? A lot of reports are talking about Bangladesh. And there's a reason for that. Bangladesh's foreign exchange reserves were at $45 billion last year. Now they have fallen to $39 billion. So the government is reaching out to foreign lenders, 3 of them to be precise. Bangladesh wants $4.5 billion from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, $1 billion from the World Bank, and another $1 billion from the ADB, the Asian Development Bank. Reports say it is a preemptive move, which means it is only precautionary. Bangladesh has enough dollars to cover its imports for at least 4 months. Having said that, questions will be asked. In 2021, this country was celebrating an economic high. Its per capita income had overtaken India's. How did things go bad in less than 1 year? Because of 2 reasons. Number one, the rising energy costs. Now let me show you where Bangladesh's energy comes from. 57% is natural gas, 17% is biomass, 13% is coal, and 12% is oil. So natural gas is the main source of energy for them. The problem is, gas shipments are hard to find. Europe is scooping up natural gas by paying more money, so countries like Bangladesh are left with 2 options: either cut down usage or buy gas at higher rates from the spot markets. How high? Almost 10 times more than the summer average. The result is this: a widening trade deficit. In the last financial year, Bangladesh's deficit rose to $33 billion. What does that mean? It means Bangladesh is importing way more than it is exporting. The difference is almost to the tune of $33 billion. And when that happens, when you import more than you export, your foreign exchange reserves also plummet. So that's one reason. The second reason is falling exports. Chief among them, garments. All your major global brands make their clothes in Bangladesh. It makes up nearly 84% of all exports. That's almost $34 billion. But recently, those exports have slowed down. Why? Because energy is too expensive. You see, Bangladesh's garment factories have very little margins. They work on cutthroat budgets. If the energy costs are too high, their output comes down. Add to that power cuts. Garment factories are forced to use generators for at least 3 hours a day. Again, that's higher costs. Plus, the global demand for garments has stalled. You see, most countries are faced with rising inflation. People are struggling to afford food and fuel, so branded clothes are not exactly in high demand. And these 2 reasons explain why Bangladesh is running out of dollars. The good news is the government is reacting in time. The bad news is they're not admitting the problem. Yes, Bangladesh is better off than Sri Lanka, but surely Sri Lanka cannot be the benchmark. We have seen it repeatedly during such economic crises. The key is to have the people on the same page. Only then can governments survive forex shortages. And for Bangladesh, this could in fact be an opportunity. I know it sounds illogical, but IMF bailouts have served as timely reminders before. Take the example of India. In 1990, the Reserve Bank of India ran out of dollars. India secured an IMF bailout to survive the crisis. 30 years later, look where India is, one of the biggest economies in the world. Bangladesh has the ability to do something similar. In fact, they're better placed than India was in 1990. The key is to implement wide-ranging reforms, to modernize their industries, to take the garment boom to the next level. If not, Bangladesh could become another case of what could have been. And they say when it rains, it pours. Nothing explains the current geopolitical situation so aptly. You see, the world is already struggling to cope with the ripple effect of the Ukraine war. Now the Taiwan Strait is becoming tense. And if that was not enough, there's also a flare-up in NagornoKarabakh. Armenia is accusing Azerbaijan of violating ceasefire. Azerbaijan says Armenia was trying to capture a hill in the last 48 hours. There have been drone strikes and deaths. Our next report brings you up to date.
This is the Nagorno-Karabakh ceasefire going up in flames. To understand its implication, we must start with a little recap. Nagorno-Karabakh is a disputed region. This is where it's located on the map. The region broke away from Azerbaijan in the 1990s. It was backed by Armenia. Azerbaijan and Armenia clashed in 2020. The war lasted for 6 weeks. Some 6,500 people died. Then Russia stepped in. It brokered a ceasefire. Armenia had to cede land. Azerbaijan won back part of Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia deployed some 2,000 peacekeepers in the region. That's history. Now here's what happened on the 3rd of August. Azerbaijan accused Armenia of killing one of its soldiers. Baku said that Armenia was trying to capture a hill. But its military thwarted the attempt. Armenia has a different story to tell. It said the Azeris violated the ceasefire and that they launched an attack in areas controlled by the peacekeepers.
The demilitarization of these territories, the complete withdrawal of Armenian troops, and the disarmament of illegal Armenian armed detachments are absolutely necessary.
The strike killed 2 Armenian soldiers and injured 14. Azerbaijan's defense ministry is calling it a revenge operation. Armenia, on the other hand, has called on the international community to step in to halt what it calls aggressive behavior and actions of Azerbaijan. Who else has said what? Russia is accusing Azerbaijan of violating the ceasefire, and that's hardly surprising given Russia has a military base in Armenia. So you know where its loyalty lies. The EU has called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Meanwhile, experts are pointing at the failure of Russia's peacekeeping force. They say, with Russia invading Ukraine, it has lost its status as the primary mediator in the NagornoKarabakh conflict. This works in favor of Azerbaijan. Why? The country has vowed to repopulate the area it won in the 2020 war. This is Ilham Aliyev. He is the president of Azerbaijan. Aliyev has promised his voters that he will retake the land lost in 1990. In July, Azerbaijan began its great return, sending people to the land it won. It's August, and another clash in Nagorno-Karabakh has just begun.
There's a lot going wrong in the world, but all's not lost. Our last story is a story of hope and good news. This is on the climate front. 2/3 of Australia's Great Barrier Reef has showed recovery. This is the largest coral cover in 36 years. That does not mean that the threat is over. The reefs still remain vulnerable to increasingly frequent mass beaching caused by a rise in ocean temperatures. But at least there's something to celebrate.
The Great Barrier Reef is the world's largest coral reef system, a site of remarkable variety and beauty on the northeast coast of Australia. Made of over 900 islands stretching for over 2,300 kilometers, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Great Barrier Reef contains 400 types of coral, 1,500 species of fish and 4,000 types of mollusks. In a long-term monitoring program of coral reefs, it was found that while coral reef recovery in the central and northern stretches of the site was very good, it contrasted with the southern region, where there was a loss of coral cover due to crown-of-thorns starfish outbreaks. These starfish are marine invertebrates that feed on coral, and when the conditions are right, they can multiply and devastate hard coral communities. The Australian Institute of Marine Science defines hard coral cover of more than 30% as high value.
Really good news for the reef. It shows that it is still a strong, resilient system that's able to bounce back from disturbances. But you'd caveat that with the fact that we have seen the 4th mass coral bleaching event in 7 years. So the frequency of those events is increasing, which is a major concern. And also the fact that the latest bleaching event occurred during a La Nina year where temperatures are meant to be cooler. So it's also indicative of, increased ocean temperatures, which does cause stress to the corals and lead to the mass coral bleaching.
In the northern region, average hard coral cover grew to 36% in 2022 from a low of 13% in 2017. While in the central region, hard coral cover increased to 33% from a low of 12% in 2019. These are the highest levels recorded for both regions since the Institute began monitoring the reef in 1985. However, the southern region, which generally has higher hard coral cover than the other 2 regions, cover fell to 34% in 2022 from 38% a year earlier. In the northern and central regions, the growth in coral cover has been driven by Acropora corals. These are particularly vulnerable to wave damage, heat stress and crown-of-thorns starfish, which means that these corals will need to be protected if this growth is to be sustained. Still, the recovery comes after the fourth mass bleaching in 7 years and is the first recorded during a La Nina event, which typically brings cooler temperatures. Bureau Report WION World is One.
And now let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Iraq's Shiite leader Muqtada Sadr, whose supporters have occupied the country's parliament, has called for the dissolution of parliament, and fresh polls saying the parliament sit-in will continue until the demands are met. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Cambodia on the sidelines of the ASEAN meet, discussing immediate regional challenges including Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Bank of England hikes interest rates to 1.75%, the highest level since December 2008.
The committee judged that a more forceful policy action was justified at this meeting, as there have been some indications that inflationary pressures are becoming more persistent.
The bank also raises inflation forecast, predicting recession for the UK economy later this year. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba reports flat revenue growth for the first time ever as the country grapples with an economic slowdown. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres accuses oil and gas companies of making excessive profits from the energy crisis sparked by the war in Ukraine, calling it immoral, and urging governments to tax the companies' earnings. Rescuers are racing to free about 10 workers believed to be trapped in a coal mine in northern Mexico, while 3 others were found alive. At least 3 people have been reported missing due to flooding in some regions of northeastern Japan following torrential rains overnight. The Japanese Fire and Disaster Management Agency has ordered roughly 500,000 people to evacuate Niigata, Ishikawa, and Yamagata prefectures. Men's world number 1 Daniil Medvedev earned the 250th win of his career as he returned to action for the first time since June, making his debut at the Los Cabos Open. Medvedev registered a straight sets win over Rinki Hijikata of Australia. Olympic 100 meters champion Elaine Thompson-Herah cruised to her first Commonwealth Games gold in the 100 meters dash. The 5-time Olympic champion, who only got to race after Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce pulled out, finished ahead of St. Lucia's Julian Alfred and England's Daryl Nieta.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.